Well, at least you're still around. Amcor's not. All right. That's what I got on my computer also, 6 o'clock. So if everybody's ready for the ride, we'll get this meeting started. All right, I'll call the Winnebago County Board meeting to order. Tonight is Thursday, March 11th, 2021. And tonight's invocation and pledge of allegiance is by board member Fred Westcott. Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chairman. Dear God, we pray for you to bless us in this meeting and help us do our duty as public servants and keep our country safe and all our troops out of harm's way. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States
of America,
And to the
and
republic
to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
liberty,
liberty,
and justice for all.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, sir.
We'll move on to our agenda announcements. I don't believe we have any adjustments to our agenda this evening, Mr. Thompson.
No, we don't, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Thank you. Now we will call the roll call. Clerk Cummow, can you please call the roll?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start tonight with Mrs. Gorel.
Present.
Mr. Hoffman.
Present.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. Lindmark.
Present.
Mr. McCarthy.
Present.
Mr. McDonald.
Here.
Mr. Neighbors. Mr. Neighbors. Mrs. Red.
Present.
Mr. Salgado.
Present.
Mr. Schultz.
Here.
Mr. Tassoni.
Present.
Mr. Webster.
Here.
Mr. Westcott.
Present.
Mr. Arena. Mr.
Here.
Arena.
I'm here.
Thought I saw Paul. Okay, thank you. Mr. Billich. Mr. Billich. Mr. Booker.
Present.
Mr. Butita.
Here.
Mrs. Crosby.
Here.
Ms. Fellers.
Present.
Mr. Girl.
Present.
Okay, if you indulge me one last time for Mr. Neighbors. Okay, he will be marked absent. One last time for Mr. Billich. Okay, he will be marked absent. Mr. Chairman, that is 18 board members present and 2 absent.
Very good. Thank you, Clerk Cummow. We have 18 board members present, and we do have a quorum this evening. So we'll move on to agenda item number 5 is awards presentation, public hearings, and public participation. Mr. Thompson, do we have any public participation this evening?
No speakers have signed up, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. I do not believe we have any public hearings or awards this evening either.
No, we have one presentation, though.
We have one presentation this evening. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. It's the annual report for 2020 operations at Winnebago County Animal Services by the Administrator Brett Frazier. Is Mr. Frazier present?
I am here, Chairman.
Good evening, Mr. Frazier. Are you ready for your presentation?
I prefer to do it live, but we'll do it this way. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Feel free to go ahead whenever you're ready.
All right, let me see if I can share my screen here. Let me know if you're seeing the a
That
kitten.
little cat.
Yep.
Yeah, if it's a cat, we've done it right. Well, I'm just going to spin through this as quick as I can. There was a lot that went on last year, and we put together this book. If anyone would like a printed copy, we do have enough to make them available to county board members or staff. We didn't print too many, but if you'd like one, definitely let me know. Just to jump right in, despite the pandemic, it was still a very busy year in our department. We operate, as you know, 365 days a year. We manage rabies vaccination and registration compliance for dogs and cats. We investigate animal welfare and cruelty. We help maintain public safety involving animals. And of course, we shelter lost and homeless pets to control pet population here in Winnebago County. Our goal is to provide excellent service to people and to provide excellent care to animals in need. And 2020 was in so many ways challenging, but our goal was always to balance safety and health concerns with the very real need to continue serving the people and pets of the community. Now, as you go through the annual report, and hopefully you were all sent a link to it so you can look at it on your own time as well, you'll see some of the evidence of COVID-19. Generally speaking, when we look at the period of the end of March through the end of May, it caused everything we do to fall to about 30% of what we would normally experience during that time period. A lot of that was because of external factors, but a lot of it was also by design as we followed guidelines from the National Animal Care and Control Association, designed to keep people and staff and residents safe and healthy, while also balancing that with the need to continue providing essential services. So there on the right-hand page, you can see some of the big stats. This year, we actually registered over almost 52,000 cats and dogs in Winnebago County. That was up just a little bit. We impounded just over 3,700 animals, which included 2,087 cats and 1,221 dogs. Dog intake last year was one of those areas where we saw the impact throughout the year. It ended up about down 34% over 2019 numbers, but it does look like that's picking up this year again. Our reclaim rate for dogs actually went up, which was great. And other than during the first months of the pandemic, our cat intake was really strong. We actually ended the year down just 56 fewer cats than the year before. And despite taking in fewer cats, the total number of cats adopted actually grew by 7.7% for the year. You can see there we continued to grow our foster program. We sent 255 animals into our own foster homes, and those fosters provided an amazing 7,451 days of foster care to those animals. That's mostly kittens and then medical cases. Here you start to get a look at the intake and the outcome. Just as a reminder, the vast majority of our intake each year is cats and dogs. On this page, you can see the breakdown of those intake numbers. Total intake was down in 2020 due to the impact of the pandemic, but we do expect, and we are already experiencing, that to return to normal this year. As for outcomes, just under 1,800 adoptions last year, 566 returned to owner, and a continued reduction in euthanasia. Creating positive outcomes was a priority when I was hired, and it continues to be a priority for our department. With lost pets, our first hope, of course, is to reunite them with families. And last year, just focusing in on dogs, 43% of all dogs were reunited with an owner. But when you look at just stray dogs, 66% of those dogs went back home to their families. So that's awesome. Between return to owner, adoption, and other live outcomes, more than 84% of all cats and dogs that came to our shelter in 2020 left with what we call a live outcome. That's a dramatic improvement over just a few years ago. You've probably been hearing a lot about how it was basically exactly a year ago that the world started to go sideways a little bit and the pandemic started. This page on the left just talks about our timeline through the year. In March, when things started to shut down, April 6th, we decided, hey, we need to figure out how to do adoptions by appointment. And then June, when we reopened, essentially did away with appointments and removed any limitations on intake. And we were really then back to normal, but with the addition of masks, social distancing, and a new and acute awareness of how many door handles there are at Animal Services. I know a lot of departments dealt with COVID, and we were not immune to that. Between positive cases and close contact quarantines, we were very often in 2020 down to skeleton crews in certain areas of the department. But we pulled together and we made it work every day for the rest of the year. Over on the right-hand page, you see there the work that our officers do out in the community. Our officers covered 520 square miles. And actually for a little bit of the year, it was more than that when we helped Boone County out when they needed some assistance. Our officers responded to 7,575 calls for service in the community. And those calls include everything from checking on a report of animal running at large or a barking dog to investigating a bite incident. And of course, we investigated some pretty serious cruelty and neglect cases. If you watch the news in the morning or if you listen to the radio, chances are you've seen our Pet of the Week spots on WREX, WIFR, WQRF on TV, and Q98 on the radio. This year, as we are doing our meeting tonight, we did all of those appointments starting at the end of March via Zoom. They're a huge part of what we do to spread the word about the animals here at the shelter. And we're so thankful to those partners for being a part of helping pets go home. Our veterinary team also was really busy this year. We have 2 veterinarians and 2 certified veterinary technicians on staff. And with that team, we're able to ensure that every one of the thousands of animals admitted to animal services receives medical evaluation and care, and that each pet adopted from our department leaves spayed or neutered. Some pets, like Mike the kitten here, need a little bit of extra care. And thanks to the team we have in-house, we are able to provide that care here at the shelter in most cases. Some of the cats that come to our shelter, we talked about the euthanasia continuing to go down. Not every cat that comes to our shelter is able to be adopted. And unfortunately, only 1 to 2% of cats that come to our shelter are reclaimed. That's pretty standard nationally. So that leaves some cats who aren't right for adoption and who aren't getting reclaimed. We wanted to create live outcomes for those animals. So over the last couple of years, we've started the TNR program and our working cat program. Through TNR, we provide neuter services to residents who trap outdoor cats that they're caring for. They transport to us. We make a certain number of surgery spots available each week. And then those cats go back to their home, spayed, neutered, vaccinated, and healthy, ready to go. For our working cat adoption program, those are cats that are better suited to an outdoor home, but you can see there, we require some things of those homes and we provide some things to those cats. Just another way that we have reduced euthanasia and increased live outcomes. If you've been to any of the PetSmarts, you can see there all the PetSmarts we're in. We've grown from 1 location just a few years ago to 6 PetSmart locations. In the Rockford area, we have 2, and then up in Wisconsin, we've got 4. That's a huge part of keeping our shelter population down with cats and getting those cats adopted very quickly. One of the things that you might not realize is the average length of stay here at our shelter for cats and dogs is generally between 8 and 12 days. That's really, really quick. And that's the key to being able to help thousands of animals, but keep the daily population here in the building down. Last year, we did just over 400 adoptions at those PetSmart locations, and that relied on the efforts of our staff, our volunteers who do the transporting, and then, of course, PetSmart staff and management. We're so grateful to them. Speaking of volunteers, you can take a look and get to know a couple of our great fosters, one of our awesome dog volunteers, and just get an idea of some of the people who chip in to make this department work every day. When you get a chance, take a look at the rest of the report. It's got a ton of great statistics in there about officer activity, call types, bite investigations, citations issued, pet registrations, just a ton of great information that you can comb through. And if you have questions, definitely let me know. As we're looking into 2021, it's already been busy, but we do have some big goals and projects. Next month, we will be launching a new shelter management software system that will allow us to better utilize our data to drive decision making. We are getting ready to launch a brand new website next month that we think will be really exciting and helpful to residents. Our patrol vehicles, we're working on getting those replaced and updated and professionally outfitted. PetSmart adoptions, we're hoping to grow those by 50% this year. And we are tonight on your agenda hoping to revamp and simplify income verification for low-income services. The last thing we'll talk about later this year is we are hoping to start to study rates of pet ownership, the percentages of pets who become lost in Winnebago County, and how folks here in Winnebago County get their pets back when they do. It's a ton of great things going on here. It's such a busy group and such a great team down here at 4517 North Main. If you have a chance to stop by, definitely do. If you'd like to get a copy of this report in paper form, I can definitely do that. And if you have questions, just let me know. Thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Is there any questions from board members this evening for Mr. Frazier?
I have one.
Please.
Okay. Hey, Brett, this is Jim Webster.
Hi.
Hey, I got a question for you. Last year, we gave a helping hand to Boone County. They were kind of in a jam. And
Yep.
so we went and helped them out. How did everything work out with that?
It worked out fine. They ended up hiring staff, and so they no longer needed our assistance. We did invoice them for those services, and that revenue went into last year's budget. It definitely wasn't the sort of thing that was easy to make work from a long-term standpoint, but on a short-term emergency basis, we made it work. It helped them. It helped inject some additional revenue into our department budget, and that was great.
Yeah, thank you. That's kind of what I'd heard, and it's good to know that we could lend a helping hand to them, and that sometime in the future, they may have to return that favor to us. Thank you, Brett.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Is there any other questions from board members? Hearing none.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a comment, and I guess you could actually say a compliment to Mr. Frazier. That's a wonderful piece. It was laid out nicely and so forth, and there's a lot of valuable information. So I would like a copy, and maybe there's some way you could get some down to the chairman's office or put one in our mailboxes or something there, because I know there's others in my neighborhood that would definitely like to take a look at that.
Absolutely. Tell you what I'll do. I will bring some down to the administration building and put those in mailboxes, and they'll be there whenever you get around to grabbing them. But I'll do that here, if not tomorrow, definitely first thing next week.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy.
This is Ms. Fellers.
Ms. Fellers, please.
Thank you again, Mr. Frazier, for your time this evening. I have several constituents who have reached out to me and asked about the logistics and, excuse me, cost of becoming a no-kill shelter. What would the department need to do, and what kind of changes would we see? Judging from what you told me, I think we're probably looking at a rather Herculean task, but what would need to change about the shelter or its funding for us to become a no-kill shelter?
Well, if you're asking, could we use more money? The answer is always yes. But I will say this, that phrase no kill means a lot of different things. Because of the nature of the work that we do here, sometimes that euthanasia rate, which is how you judge it, when they say no kill, they generally mean less than 10% euthanasia based on intake. For us, I actually think it's probably within reason that we might be able to hit that this year, but it's not a goal that we're shooting at. What we've tried to aim at is eliminating unnecessary euthanasia. And when I say that, what I mean is we're trying to make sure that we have programs and personnel and resources and partnerships within the department so that if there is an animal that's safe to be adopted or reclaimed, and if there's an animal that isn't injured or ill so much that there's a quality of life issue that we can't correct, we want to be able to address those needs. So here, I feel confident in saying we have eliminated unnecessary euthanasia. We did have a live release rate for cats and dogs of just over 84%, which is awesome. That is significant improvement. And I can send you some information on where we were at back in 2017 and 2018. But I think the big thing that will help us is focusing on eliminating unnecessary euthanasia, because we don't want to chase around a 10% or a 9% number if that comes at the expense of trying to manipulate numbers when it comes to animals that are not safe to be adopted, or animals that are very sick or very injured. So we can definitely work towards lowering euthanasia, and we definitely do. And I'd love to talk to anyone about that. Well, what we really focus on is eliminating unnecessary euthanasia.
I very much appreciate that answer, and thank you also for that update. My other question, just in general, is, and we could maybe do this another time too, is I often go to your website because my children have been asking for a dog, and we've been considering adopting. Almost every animal that I see available, it feels this way at least, seem to be of a particular breed for dogs. Is there a local breeder that's problematic? Do we have an issue with specifically Staffordshire and Pit Bull Terriers? Why is the rate of that specific breed being in our shelter significantly and shockingly higher than other breeds or kinds of animals?
So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to run, we keep data on primary breed of dog. And of course, it's just our guess. We don't do DNA testing or anything like that. But I'm going to run a report to see what the breakdown is of total intakes, what percentage of that is pit bull type breeds. It's definitely a large percentage of what we get in, but on our website, it starts to look like an even larger percentage because other breeds get adopted so much more quickly. And so when you look at the website, you can sometimes see them disproportionately represented because they do take a little bit longer sometimes to get through the system. But I will run a report, and I can share that with folks on sort of the different breed group breakdowns and what percentage of the total that is. We don't really see there's not any one source. There's not really any one neighborhood or anything like that. There's just a lot of bully breeds and pit bull breed dogs, in the community and in the greater region generally. It's something that everybody struggles with, but we can look into the data and see if there's any patterns that we can see there, and we can provide some more information.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Fellers. Is there any other questions from board members? All right. Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Appreciate the presentation this evening. All righty, we'll move on to number 6 is the approval of the minutes. I entertain a motion to approve the February 11th, 2021 minutes and a layover of the February 25th, 2021 minutes. Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
Mr. Webster moves. Is there a second?
So moved.
Mr. Westcott is the second. Is there any discussion on the approval of the minutes? Hearing none, clerk may call the roll, please.
Certainly. I'm going to start with Mr. McCarthy.
Yes.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors is still absent. Mrs. Red.
Yes.
Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Tassoni.
Mr. Tassoni is having some problems, but he's there.
Okay, I will swing around back to him at the end. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Westcott.
Yes.
Mr. Arena.
Yes.
Mr. Billich. Mr. Billich, I
Yes.
believe joined us. Thank you, Mr. Billich. Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark.
Yes.
Okay, and just one more time for Mr. Tassoni. Okay, we will just mark him not voting at this time. So, Mr. Chairman, that's 18 yes, 1 absent, and 1 not voting.
Thank you, Clerk Gamal. The minutes have been approved and laid over this evening. Move on to number 7 is the consent agenda. May I entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
So moved.
Mr. Girl and Mr. Hoffman is a second. Thank you so much. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none, Clerk Gamal, may you please call the roll?
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors, still absent. Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni, still not voting. Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That would be 18 yes, 1 absent, 1 not voting.
Thank you. The consent agenda is approved this evening. Move on to number 8 on our agenda is the appointments. Per county board rules, board chairman appointments require a 30-day layover unless there is a suspension of the rules. Tonight, we have 2 appointments that are on the agenda. The first is the North Park Water District Board, His name is Brett Herbie. He is a new appointment. The second is the Harlem Roscoe Fire District Board, Mr. Al Bach Sr., and that is a reappointment for your consideration. Hearing no suspension, we'll move on to number 9. All right, we move on to reports of standing committees. The first committee is the Finance Committee, and we have Mr. Salgado.
Thank you.
Excuse me, if I could interrupt for one moment, I apologize, but I'm having very intermittent internet connection and I might only be on for a few seconds. So if I'm not available for Public Works, Mr. Kelly, would you please take the roll? Thank you and sorry for the interruption.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. We'll make sure that happens. Mr. Salgado.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee has 6 items tonight. The first one is a resolution extending the deadline for filing applications for the Senior Citizens Assessment Freeze Homestead Exemption, and I so move.
Motion by Mr. Salgado. Is there a second, please?
I
Mr.
second.
McCarthy and Angela Fellers is the second. Thank you. Is there any discussion on item number 2, the resolution?
Just real quick, it's just an extension from July 1st to October 1st. That's all it is.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Any other discussion? Clerk Gamal, can you please call the roll?
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni, are you with
Yes.
us?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that would be 19 yes and 1 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gamal. The resolution has been approved, 19 board members. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 3, Mr. Salgado.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And our next item is a resolution opposing the state reductions to the LGDF revenue, and I so move.
We have a motion to approve the resolution opposing the state reduction to the LGDF revenue. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by, I believe, Mr. Arena. Very good. Is there any discussion on this item? Okay, hearing none. Clerk Gamal, can you please call the roll?
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that is 19 yes and 1 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gamal. The resolution opposing state reductions to the LGDF revenue has passed by 19 board members. Thank you. Number 4, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The next item is ordinance for approval of the budget amendment for emergency rental assistance program. This is to be laid over, but I'd like to motion.
I'm sorry, Mr. Salgado, you broke up on the last part.
Yes, I'd like to motion to suspend the rules.
Okay, we have
I'll
a
second
motion.
that motion.
We have a motion by Mr. Salgado to suspend the rules and a second by Ms. Fellers. Is there any discussion on the motion to suspend the rules? Hearing none, Clerk Gamal, can you call the roll on the suspension, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is 19 yes and 1 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gamal. The suspension has been approved by 19 board members. Mr. Salgado, would you like to make a motion to approve now that it's been suspended, the ordinance for approval of the budget
Yes.
amendment?
Yes, I
Please.
would like, I'd like to motion to approve ordinance for approval of the budget amendment for emergency rental assistance program.
I second. This is Ms. Feller seconding.
Very good. Mr. Salgado moves to approve and Ms. Fellers is the second. Is there a discussion? Hearing none. Clerk Gamal, could you please call the roll?
Mr.
Sir.
Arena had a question.
Yes, that's sorry.
Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to say to this item and to the IGA with the city of Rockford that accompanies this, I'll be abstaining because I'm in the business of providing housing. But I would like to say that I fully support both of these. And I want to thank everyone, in the administration, Ms. Vaughn, Mr. Zeiss from the NIREACH, for all the work they've done putting this together. I think we've really done a good job getting us off to the right start. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. We appreciate this. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Clerk Gamow, can you please call the roll?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Gurl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that is 18 yes, 1 absent, and 1 abstention.
Thank you, Clerk Gamow. The 18 board members have approved the ordinance this evening. Thank you. Number 5, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to actually skip number 5 for now and go on to item number 7, which is a resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement between the County of Winnebago and the City of Rockford for the U.S. Department of Treasury Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and I so move.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Is moved to approve. Do I have a second?
I second.
Ms. Fellers is the second. Do we have any discussion on item number 7 this evening? Hearing none. Clerk Gamow, can you please call the roll?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr.
Chairman?
Chairman.
Yes.
Will there be a suspension of the rules for this one as well?
Is it needed for this item?
I would say yes.
Okay, very good. So we will backtrack. Mr. Salgado, would you like to move to approve the suspension of rules?
A point of order. This is a resolution. You need to suspend?
That's a resolution.
I couldn't hear.
It's a resolution. I don't think that you need to suspend, but
Ordinance.
Ms.
Okay,
Vaughn
let's
is,
make sure. So,
okay, very good. We'll
thank you.
just go with the approval without the suspension. Okay, so we do have the motion and a second to approve the resolution. We ask for comments or questions. Hearing none. Clerk Gamow, can you please call the roll, please?
Certainly. Thank you. Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Abstain.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Gurl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that is 18 yes, 1 absent, 1 abstention.
Thank you, Clerk Gamow. The resolution has been approved by 18 board members. Mr. Salgado, you want to go back to number 5?
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to, budget or ordinance to fund Winnebago County CJCC program is to be laid over, but I'd like to motion to suspend the rules on this one.
Motion to suspend the rules on the budget ordinance to fund Winnebago County CJCC program. Do I have a second?
Second, Crosby.
Crosby is second. Is there any discussion on the suspension of rules?
Just real quick, Mr. Chairman, the reason for the suspension is it's kind of a time-sensitive piece. There was an urgency to get this through finance on Tuesday, and so hopefully to get voted on today.
Very good, Mr. Salgado. Thank you for that clarification. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Clerk Gummow, may you please call the roll?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that is 19 yes and 1 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gummow. So the budget ordinance has been approved for the suspension. Mr. Salgado, would you like to
Yes.
place the suspended item up for passage?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move to approve budget ordinance to fund a Winnebago County CJCC program.
We have a motion to approve by Mr. Salgado. Do I have a second, please?
Second.
We have a believe by Mr. Hoffman is the second. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Clerk Gummow, may you please call the roll?
Mr. Tassoni had a,
Oh, Mr. Tassoni has a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I guess if I'm correct, this budget amendment and these monies cover the next 6 months of this fiscal year. What will be the total annual salary next fiscal year?
Mr. Rickard on the connection here? Or Mr. Thompson?
Yes, the annual salary of the position is approximately $70,000 annually.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Mr. Webster?
Yeah, is this a permanent position now?
Yes, it's a permanent position.
Yeah, if I may interject here, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just kind of, some detail behind it. So originally, right now, the way it currently is, it's sitting at the regional plan one, about $20,000 we give in kind as part of going to the salary on this. Now we're bringing it in-house and finding funding from it. $20,000 is coming back to the county. $10,000 from the city of Rockford. There's a $30,000 in revenue potentially from program management piece that's going to come, and the additional 4,000 I want to say is right now is in funds that are going to be in the reserves. So it's strategically from everything that's going on with the criminal justice reform, and internally it's a fit to kind of get it in-house. So we can work with the sheriff's department and so forth, the peace center, more internally here in the county. So that's why that shift. But currently it's at regional plan, we give about $20,000. They're working with the different grants and everything like that. So one of the things that Mr. Richter said, that there's an opportunity potentially to actually secure all the funding through some of the grant writing that the regional plan has kind of done so in the past. So we're just trying to bring it in-house to align basically with our strategy from the criminal justice system standpoint.
Very well said, Mr. Salgado. And that's $20,000 a year that the county board allocates. It's been in
Correct.
existence for about 2 years, a little over 2 years. So it's more than 40,000, I believe, in allocation so far. And the city of Rockford is 10 per year, and they've already put in over 20,000. So just for everyone's information, the CJCC met yesterday and they unanimously approved the move to Winnebago County Administration. So there won't be any impact to the CJCC. We're just fostering better growth, better communication and alignment with us and the CJCC members. Thank you. Is there any other questions?
Just one.
Mr. Webster?
Thank you. Please allow me this.
Yes.
I was having the same troubles last Monday in this discussion with my computer. So anyways, so I guess what I wonder about this with so many people, so many entities contributing to this, then a person's paycheck, where does that come from? So is it from the county of Winnebago or the city of Rockford, or where does it come from? And so I guess I wonder if all the other, if we were the only one contributing and all the other entities said, nah, we're not in this no more, then we, the county, would be the only one in this. And then we, the county, would be the sole entity to account for the retirement, the pension, the insurance, and all that, the legacy costs, in other words.
Yes, I can answer that question. And yes, it is in, MRF, it does have insurance, all that comes with it. There are legacy costs going forward on that. So yes, Mr. Webster, you are correct. It's through the county. Like I said, part of it from grants, part of it's from the city of Rockford. And so that's where that funding is coming from. But yes, you are correct. There are legacy costs, IMRF, pension, and insurance, and so forth. It's just like a regular employee within the county.
Yeah. So in other words, if everyone else pulled out, we are still the only ones there responsible for this person's employment.
That's correct.
Yeah, that discussion has been taking place, Mr. Webster, and the other CJCC members are the state's attorney, the sheriff, the chief judge, the federal government partners, the probation partners. They are all very committed to this CJCC, and I don't foresee anybody withdrawing any payments. In fact, yesterday at the meeting, they all confirmed that they are all very dedicated to this for a long-term association. That's what they said yesterday in the meeting. Most of the members are our departments that we fund currently, except for the city of Rockford.
Correct. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Is there any other questions? Hearing none, Clerk Gumow, can you please call the roll?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster.
Yes.
One last time for Mr. Kelly. Mr. Chairman, we have 18 yes, 1 absent, 1 not voting.
Very good. The budget ordinance has been approved by 18 board members. Thank you. Mr. Salgado, number 6.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Next item is budget ordinance for vehicle replacement. It's to be laid over, but I'd like to motion to suspend the rules since Mr. Frazier is here with us tonight.
Very good. We have a motion to suspend the rules on the budget ordinance for vehicle replacement. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Crosby seconds the motion. Is there any discussion on the suspension of rules? Hearing none or seeing none, Clerk Gamow, may you please call the roll?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
No.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark, Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that is 18 yes, 1 no, and 1 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gamow. The item has been approved by 18 board members. The item is suspended. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move and motion the budget ordinance for the vehicle replacement.
We have a motion to approve by Mr. Salgado. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Crosby seconds. Is there any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Frazier, just give us a high level quickly. We discussed this already in our finance committee. So, Mr. Frazier.
Thank you very much. Essentially, what we've got here is a plan to replace and update and outfit patrol vehicles for animal services. Our vehicle fleet right now is aging. There's some repair issues, and they're not honestly very outfitted professionally. What we've got is old vehicles with plastic dog crates in the back. The plan in front of you is a plan we've worked on over the course of the last 2+ years to create a uniform fleet of patrol vehicles to serve the community. They will be professionally equipped with stainless steel cages that will be safer for animals and safer for our officers, not to mention the residents that we serve. This will update obsolete computer equipment that is in each vehicle and make sure that those vehicles are properly striped and lit. The lifespan of these vehicles will be about 5 years. The lifespan of the other equipment will be a bit longer. The financing was originally anticipated to be a local borrowing issue, but we realized that a cheaper and more efficient way to finance this was using department fund balance from both our operational fund balance and our donation fund balance. So you have the memo in front of you. You can see we're taking some money out of each of those balances, leaving plenty behind, about $190,000 in both of those two funds, even after we self-finance this upgrade of our replacement of our vehicles.
Yeah, just real quickly, Mr. Frazier, it's $65,000 per unit. There's 5 of them, so about 325,000. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I just wanted to further the record.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier, and thank you, Mr. Salgado. Is there any other questions or pertaining to this motion?
Right here, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. McCarthy.
Mr. Frazier, what will happen to the, well, soon to be previous vehicles? Are they sold or what happens from that point forward?
Yep. Likely we'll keep one of them for some other things that we do here, picking up cat and dog food, litter, running animals to other veterinary clinics when we need to do something like that for x-rays or something along those lines. The remainder, though, will be sold. Importantly, we have not budgeted in any revenue we would get from the sale of those vehicles. That, of course, would then go back in to further offset our operating budget once we are able to do those sales.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. Any further questions? Hearing none, Clerk Gamow, may you please call the roll?
Yeah, a question, Chairman.
McDonald.
Mr. McDonald, so sorry.
Oh, thank you very much, Chairman. How many vehicles are you planning on purchasing, Mr. Fraser?
5.
And my only concern with that, I'm not saying that your fleet doesn't deserve to be updated. Replacing 5 vehicles right now means all 5 will become due to be replaced again in a similar time frame. Would it make more financial sense to do 2 or 3 this year and 2 or 3 next year to spread that cost out some?
We considered that. There are some advantages to, so the last time we bought vehicles, we bought 2015 and 2016 used vehicles with quite a few miles on them. Unfortunately, that was sort of the name of the game for a lot of the years down here, is hobbling along. And so what we're experiencing is an escalation of maintenance costs. We now just got a new fleet maintenance or a fleet monitoring system that shows us some of the codes associated with the vehicles. I totally take your point about having them all cycle out at the same time. What we feel is that that's offset right now by the advantages of having all the same vehicle on all the same use schedule, and having the exact same equipment so that they are uniform throughout the fleet and can be aged uniformly.
And who does the maintenance on your vehicles, Mr. Fraser?
Well, we take them to a number of different places right now, but primarily Bovies.
Good place.
Great. Anything further, Mr. McDonald?
No, I will be voting no on this just because of this timing. I do think, I do support animal services getting upgraded equipment. I would just prefer to see them spread that cost out over 2 or 3 years.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McDonald. Any other questions? I don't see everybody on the screen, so just speak up if you have a.
Mr. Tassoni, please.
Yes, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, and like I say, I get it with the buying 5 now, and maybe they're all up, and you know, I don't know what the longevity might be, but maybe it's 4 years from now, you upgrade 3, keep 2 for a couple of years, and upgrade 2 more, and stagger them once you know you get down the road a little bit. And you know, I think I'm somewhat familiar with animal control services over there, and the persons that go out and catch the dogs and cats and whatnot. And I think nice, new, clean, adequate vehicles will help with the morale and make them, you know, feel a little better in their vehicle that is somewhat like their mobile office. And I'm just curious, are they vans, trucks, 4-wheel drives, or what?
So we looked at a lot of different options. We looked at a number of different van types, and we also looked at Ford Explorers. There are some great things that they're doing there with the fuel efficiency, longevity of the engine in idle. We ended up deciding that the best thing to do was to go with Ford Transit 250 vans and the custom enclosure that goes into them. That allows us the most number of animals, an adequate number of animal enclosures in the vehicle. We are switching from a rear-wheel drive, which is the standard for Transit 250s, to all-wheel drive. Which we think will definitely assist with some of the issues we've had in the winters.
So this is Ms. Fellers.
Ms. Fellers, please.
The reason that I had voted no to suspending the rules was so that we could have a discussion like this. I share Mr. McDonald's concern in buying all 5 at the same time, not because I don't believe that that Mr. Fraser is an expert in his department. I do defer to his expertise in his department, but because at a time when the county is really facing a lot of budget crises, and we may be needing to make cuts to services that are essential, like animal services, I'd like to see the budgets be held as tightly as possible, and the expenditure for 5 new vehicles when we have some vehicles that are running right now seems like something that we should sit and have some thought on. And so I will also be voting no to this evening, only because I think that we should look at how we're spending our money, and we should really be thinking about the next few years when we'll all be tightening our belts in every department.
Thank you, Ms. Fellers. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none.
Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Kelly, yes, Mr. Kelly, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We do this all the time. Thank you, Keith. phasing things out, spreading out the cost, and that way you replace some every year, but not everything all at once. And for that reason, I'm afraid I'll be opposing to. I support animal services, and I love Brett and everything he's doing out there, but I think this is the wrong way to do it.
Thank you,
May
Mr.
I add
Kelly.
one thing, Mr. Chairman?
Please.
So one thing, and certainly I understand where the members are coming from. You'll recall when we were having discussions with one of our bigger municipal customers a couple of years ago, and they extended for a couple of years. That threw into doubt what the shape and size of our department was going to be overall. If we had no longer provided animal control services to the city of Rockford, that would have changed our needs. At that time, we were budgeting $100,000 a year. And then even last year, we budgeted $50,000 and we spent none of that. What we should have been doing is exactly what Mr. McDonald and others advocate is we should have been going step by step, phasing in vehicles. What this plan is intended to do at this point is not to work ahead, but to catch up from where we were. It's very likely, almost certain that we will seek to go back to a phased implementation plan in future vehicle purchases. But that's just the history of why we haven't been doing it to this point. I totally agree with that approach. It just isn't something that we've been able to do the last couple of budget cycles.
But Mr. Chairman, Jean Crosby.
Yes, Ms. Crosby.
I support this because I support passing it because these vehicles, guys, are on life support. They are in terrible shape. They're loaded up with miles and they don't have a long lifespan left in them. And we're going to spend a fortune in repairs. So I'm going to support this. And I think we can stagger next time around because we'll have, I can't see us replacing five vehicles in 5 years. But who knows? But at the same time, these guys need vehicles that they can rely on. And as I said, they're on life support now. So I support it. Thank you,
Ms. Crosby. Is there any other board members?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Arena.
Thank you. Mr. Frazier, I'm sure you mentioned this, but I missed it. When was the last time that we purchased new vehicles?
I believe that was 2017. 2017 or the beginning of 2018. It's not been since I was here.
Okay, so these vehicles then are, the ones you're replacing are 5 years old?
2 of them are that old. Some of them are older. We actually have one vehicle that is newer than that. There's a Ford 250, F-250 that was bought, I believe, in 2018. That vehicle is the newest in our fleet, and it has given us the most trouble. We'll be getting rid of that one as well. So even the newest vehicle has had some challenges associated with it.
So if this vote were to fail, and say you had to come back with a just partial purchase, how would you implement that? What would be the effect on your operation?
Well, I mean, I suppose the effect in the operation would just be that we would purchase fewer vehicles. We'll work with whatever budget we have to work with. What we would then try to do is, obviously, the newer vehicles aren't just newer vehicles. They'll have fundamentally different equipment and cage systems inside them. We feel like that's an advantage to our officers and to the service we provide. So we would probably prioritize the use of whatever number of newer vehicles we got. We would probably still sell some of our other vehicles, and we would probably rack up miles more quickly on the vehicles that we did purchase. We have 7 officers and 1 supervisor, and we're looking to purchase 5 vehicles. So it's not a 1-to-1 or anything like that. We put a lot of thought into the number of vehicles and tried to make sure that we were as efficient as we could be with these dollars, because these dollars are the dollars from the animal services budget, and they're the dollars that we have to live within our department. So we're very conscious of trying to make the most out of every single dollar, just as you all are.
Okay, so do you know approximately what you spend right now on maintenance on the vehicle fleet you have?
I don't have that on me right now, but I can get that dollar amount.
Is it significant or has it been just normal maintenance costs? Do you have?
We've had some challenges, some bigger issues that we've had to fix with air conditioning. It seems like a vehicle is in the garage pretty regularly. We have normal maintenance, and then we do have some vehicles that are starting to show issues that we can't fix. Rust that is going to cause them to be unsafe to drive, under the vehicle.
So if this purchase is made of all 5 vehicles and moving forward, we accommodate the, desire of many of our board members who want a staggered system, how would you implement that? If you're buying 5, they're going to last 5 years. Do you have an idea of how you'd work in it so that in the future, you're not buying the whole fleet at one time?
Yes, I think what we would do is we would start to incorporate into our capital budget each year, some amount of money taken from our operational revenue that we would then earmark for future vehicle replacement. And then we would factor that into, probably the whole countywide capital improvement plan, but definitely our department CIP. So that we would know how to anticipate those costs and the logistics associated with transferring equipment in the future. So I anticipate we would start to budget for that right away in subsequent budget years, but the replacement would likely be planned in phases beginning, as I say, as no earlier, I wouldn't think, than 5 budget years from now.
Okay, well, I agree with Mr. McDonald's concern. But I also think that maybe we're in a position now where we can't do it in the optimal way. So I'm going to vote in favor of this, but I also am going to look that we have a plan, as you've just described, for our future purchases of vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Areno. Is there any other
Chairman?
discussion? Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please, Mr. Butita.
Okay, thank you. I happen to have a lot of experience in the commercial vehicle procurement area over my career, and I haven't seen Brad's numbers, but I know what he's spending on maintenance for old vehicles, and it adds up quickly. Not to mention, new vehicles are going to come with warranties, so we're going to shift a bunch of costs from maintenance to new vehicle warranty plans, and I haven't seen the numbers, but I know just from myself and my experience that new equipment is going to operate better. It's going to give you better productivity, and versus used equipment. And the used equipment is not going to get the resale value is not going to get any better down the road. So if it's on the end of its life, now's the time to get rid of it. So I'll vote in favor of this. Then, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butita.
Mr. Chairman.
Further? Yes, Mr. Billich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry about that. I do have one question for Mr. Frazier in regards to everyone's concerns. And it seems that everybody's in favor of obviously upgrading and updating. But there was a concern with the amount of vehicles to go right out the gate. I guess I have a question for staff in this regard, or actually for the state's attorney in this regard. We can amend this right now on the floor if we were to say, for example, if it was a comfortable number with the rest of the board, if we did 3 instead of the 5, would that be a possibility to amend this resolution? And that's my question to the state's attorney's office. If I can get.
I would say
Mr.
yes.
Vaughn?
I would say yes, you can make that amendment.
And then as a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, for Mr. Frazier, would it be, as much as, obviously we all support upgrading the vehicles, obviously meeting one of those concerns, and you had mentioned that you were going to keep one around anyway. One question that I have, would it be a huge detriment if we changed it from 5 vehicles to 3, or is that going to be something that might be doable for the for your department, at least until like maybe next year, then we can replace the other two. Is that something that might be doable for you and your department?
It would be doable. I think maybe an important point is that the funds that we're planning on paying for this purchase plan and the upfitting will likely be exactly the same next year as this year, because they're coming from department fund balance and department donation funds. The donation funds are largely from a past county board member who had donated some funds. We're taking a significant chunk of this out of those funds. Those fund balances, because we try to hit our revenues equaling our expenses, those fund balances will essentially be the same next year. So the only impact would be when we get the vehicles and the logistics associated with that. I think our anticipation will always be to pay for these purchases out of those dollars. So operationally, it wouldn't really change a lot. Just logistically, we would essentially come back around and try and do it as you suggest, but with the same dollars, 12 months down the road.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Webster.
thank you. It would seem we've gone around and around on this for a bit. My suggestion, send this back to committee so everyone has a chance to weigh in, because it would appear that about half the board members here have some sort of feelings or suggestions about this. And perhaps if it went back to committee for another open discussion, and you've asked Mr. Frazier some questions about how much have been spent on repairs and so forth, and he doesn't have that in front of him right now. And so in all fairness, I think that, I don't see where it would be a huge burden to send it back to committee for another hearing or what have you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Crosby, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was going to call the question, but I think we're ready to vote, so I don't think I need to.
Jane, may I ask one question, please, or maybe two before we do that? This is
Yes.
Angie.
Yes, Angie.
Brent, as I recall, I don't think when we purchased those vehicles to begin with, they were brand new. I might be wrong, but I think some of those were already used when we purchased, when we did. Am I correct?
You are correct.
Thank you. So we're on used mileage of someone else to begin with. The other thing is, what kind of a discount are we getting by buying 5?
The van itself ends up coming in a brand new Ford Transit 250 with some options on it, $33,300. That's a pretty significant discount over the initial price. I don't know that has to do with the volume or as much as it has to do with government contracts and that sort of thing. But the price for the van itself was $33,300. And the Cajun is the next biggest.
I'm going to vote for this because we have bought used vehicles constantly over the last 15 years that I have been there. And the next thing we know, we have to turn around and buy another used vehicle. And let's start new and fresh. He has the money. It's the money of the animal services that they're using. They're not even coming in asking us as a board to donate to it. Are you?
No.
It's all your money, and then you're going to be working by saving, putting money back into that account. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. I will be voting for this.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Goro. So what's before us right now? We have a motion to approve by Mr. Salgado and a second by Ms. Crosby.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Is that Mr. Arena? Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I like Mr. Webster's suggestion that we send this back to committee so that we can really hammer down on the numbers on maintenance. This was before us tonight to be laid over anyway. And we just took advantage of Mr. Frazier's presence tonight, but I don't think it's going to be the end of the world if we take a little bit more time. So I move that we send it back to committee.
I will second that.
All right, so now we have a motion to lay this over and send it back to committee by Mr. Arena and a second by Mr. Webster. Just a clarification on my part, excuse me, for Ms. Vaughn. Do I need to do anything with the first motion?
Typically, the person who made the motion would withdraw their motion.
That's what I had
I can't
thought.
recall who made the motion.
So Mr. Salgado had made the motion and second by Ms. Crosby. Mr. Salgado, would you like to withdraw your motion?
No.
I'll go ahead and withdraw it, as there's
Okay.
been multiple questions
Okay.
and discussion.
All right, so Mr. Salgado has removed his motion to move this forward. And Ms. Crosby, you remove your second?
I don't want to remove my second.
Well,
I don't want to remove my second,
okay.
but I'll
sorry.
be a team player and.
All right, so
and
the
go
original
ahead.
motion, thank you, Ms. Crosby. The original motion has been removed. And what's before you now is a motion to lay it over and send it back to committee. Is that correct, Mr. Webster?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, Mr. Arena. All right, so that has been motioned and then seconded.
Is that two different things? Sending it back to committee and laying it over, isn't that two separate things to be voted on, or is it one?
Mr. Arena, what would you prefer? Send it back to committee?
Yeah, strictly for more in-depth conversation so we could
Okay.
get the numbers. So back to committee is what I intend.
Okay, so his motion is to send this item back to the finance committee, the next scheduled finance committee, correct? And there
Yes.
has been a second to that by Mr. Webster, I believe, or vice versa.
Yes.
I lost track. All right. Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, Clerk Gumbel, can you please call the roll?
Mr.
Mr. Tassoni has a question.
Yes, Mr. Tassoni.
Yeah, and now is this discussion just on sending it back, or is this discussion can take place on the main motion as well?
Now, the main motion was withdrawn. So what's before you?
So we can only discuss on the motion to send it back to committee?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, well, I'm against it, and basically I'm let down, but carry on.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Okay, any other discussion? Clerk Gumbel, can you please call the roll?
I'd love to, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. We will start with Mr. Village,
No.
Mr. Booker,
No.
Mr. Butita,
No.
Mrs. Crosby,
No.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
No.
Mrs. Gorel,
No.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
No.
Mr. McCarthy,
No.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
No.
Mr. Salgado,
No.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
No,
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott, Mr. Westcott,
Correct.
Mr. Arena.
Yes.
One last time for Mr. Westcott. Mr. Chairman, that is 7 yes, 11 no, 1 absent, and 1 not voting.
Thank you. The motion fails to send it back to the finance committee. So previously, there was a suspension of rules to place this before you. That was approved. Would there entertain another motion on this item?
I'll move it.
Okay, Ms. Crosby, you move to approve,
Mr.
right.
Tassoni would second.
and Mr. Tassoni seconds that motion to approve.
And speak to it as well, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Mr. Tassoni, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And members of the board, I'd just like to reiterate that, you know, I entrust in Mr. Frazier and his financial diligence with his department there. These are monies that are in his reserves. These are monies that he's allocated. And I know very well what, you know, when these vehicles, some cases are ran 24/7, all inclement weather, and they need to be reliable. And I know what it does for staff when they get a new vehicle. They take pride, they keep it cleaner, they feel better about themselves. And there will be cost savings for long-term maintenance and transmissions and motors and things of that such. And I think it's very well needed and very deserved, and I just encourage support for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Any other discussion by board members?
Yes, this is Mr. Schultz.
Yes, Mr. Schultz.
I would just like to ask, you know, I think an excellent point was made by Mr. Butita regarding new vehicles being under warranty. Could I ask for the details on the warranty on these vehicles, please?
Mr. Frazier?
It'd be the standard vehicle warranties that come with any new vehicle. So that would cover especially things like the powertrain, which is the thing we worry about when we're constantly idling and running our vehicles at high mileage. It would be, I believe, the first time in many, many years that we've had any vehicles under warranty. In fact, the Ford F-250 that was modified, because of the modification, it was never able to be serviced under warranty. These vehicles, though, will have that powertrain warranty and other equipment will be warranted.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Mr. Schultz, did you have a follow-up or is that appropriate for you?
No, honestly, I don't mean to be disrespectful, Mr. Frazier, but you didn't answer my question. I was interested in whether it was the specifics of it. So is it a 36 months, you know, 30,000 mile? Is it a, you know?
Yeah, let me see what I can pull up here.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Mr. Webster.
Yes, while Mr. Frazier is looking for the specifics on that, I'd just like to say that I'm in favor of this. I'm voting for this. The point about sending it back was because we've had all these questions come up at this point in time where the questions aren't readily available to be answered. So that was my only reason for asking or suggesting to send it back to committee just for more discussion. I'm fully behind making this purchase or letting them make the purchase on their own. I think they need those vehicles. There's no doubt about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster.
The specific warranty.
Mr. Chairman?
We'll let Mr. Frazier answer the question specifically, Ms. Fellers,
Yep.
and I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
The specific warranty information, there's the basic warranty for 36,000 miles and the powertrain warranty of 60,000 miles. Then there's a couple of other items: corrosion, perforation, unlimited miles, and roadside assistance for 60,000 miles. Those are the standard warranties that come along with it.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Mr. Schultz, did you have a follow-up on that?
Thank you for asking, Mr. Chairman. No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Fellers.
I just wanted to echo what Mr. Webster had said. I want to be clear that I am not against in any way proper equipment and safety equipment for animal services. I just had some questions, which is what the layover was designed for, which is, so that was my only thing.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fellers.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Tassoni here.
Yes, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you. And Mr. Fraser, at best, should this resolution succeed, when might you expect delivery?
The COVID has thrown things into a little bit of a whirlwind here. If this were to succeed, we would immediately place our order for the vehicles and for the cage inserts. The vehicles, we are led to believe right now, have a lead time that would cause production not to start until sometime in the summer. They have told us at the dealership that if we get the owner, they might be able to get that bumped up to sometime before June. But we really don't know that answer until we know what we're ordering. But we're hoping that we would get this going right away and that we would get the vehicles and the cage inserts right into production. Because we need air conditioning to go into the back of the vehicles and we need that to be controlled from the front of the vehicle, there's nothing on the lot that we can purchase. We looked really hard for that, but we need to make sure that the dogs and cats and other animals that are in the back have that HVAC in the back. And in order for that to work in the cages, we have to order something specific, and that almost always needs to be manufactured.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, but I pretty much knew all that too. And I'm just guessing, I mean, if you got them in 3 to 6 months, that's probably where you're at.
I'm hoping for that time frame. Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Hearing and seeing none. Clerk Gummow, can you please call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, can you clarify, did Mr. Westcott leave the meeting?
I do not see him, but does anybody see Mr. Westcott?
He's not on the participants, so I think he's left the
Okay.
meeting.
Then
Okay.
with the chairman's permission, I will record Mr. Westcott has left the meeting at approximately 7:20. Just
Very good, Miss. Come out, no problem.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, we will start with Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes,
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
No.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
No.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich. Mr. Billich? Did Jazz leave the meeting or is he just not responding?
He's still on, just MIA.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Tassoni. Okay, Mr. Chairman, we have 15 yes, 2 absent. I'm sorry, 2 noes. I apologize. 2 noes and 2 absent and 1 not voting.
Very good, Clerk. Appreciate your work on that. The budget ordinance has been approved. Thank you, Mr. Salgado, for all your hard work on these items and all the rest of your finance committee also.
I
Appreciate it.
apologize for the long.
That's okay.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to the zoning committee with Mr. Webster.
All right, thank you. We have 2 items that have been laid over. So I'll read these in and I would move to approve both of them separately. But first is Number one, SU 0420. That's a special use permit, and it comes with a laundry list of conditions. And number two is SU 0520, also a special use permit, also with a number of conditions. And I would move to approve both. In the past, sometimes we taken them both at one time, and others we've separated them, and I would suggest separating them just for legal purposes.
Okay, Mr. Webster, so you move to approve SU 04-20, special
Yes,
use
sir.
permit. Is there a
Yes, sir.
second?
Yes.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Gorel is the second. Is there any discussion on item number one? Hearing none, seeing none. Clerk Gummo, can you please call the roll?
I think Brad has a
Miss-
question.
yeah,
Brad?
Mr. Lindmark.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just wanted to say that I fully support this and I urge fellow board members to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamarck. Is there any other discussion? If you'd have any, please speak up because I don't see everybody on the screens here. Hearing none. Clerk Gummo, can you please call the roll?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that's 17 yes and 3 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gummo. Special use permit 04-20 has been approved
With conditions.
with conditions. Thank you, Mr. Webster. So item number two, do you also motion to approve?
Yes, sir. Item number two, SU 0520, also comes to you with conditions. And pardon me for being remiss, but that is in Mr. Lindmark's district. We normally announce whose district it's in. And so thank you, Mr. Lindmark, for going along or approving something in your district. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Do we have a second to that motion to approve?
I'll second.
Mr. Lindmark is the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Clerk Gummo, can you please call the roll?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, we will start with Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita.
Yes.
Thank you all, Mr. Chairman. That is 17 yes and 3 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gummo. Special use permit 05-20 has been approved. Does that conclude your report, Mr. Webster?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster, and thank you to the zoning committee. Item number C is Economic Development Committee. Mr. Billich.
I am back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
For economic development, we don't have a report for tonight. We do, however, are announcing for next Monday, we will be having a meeting And we will be going over a couple different things. We are going to have a memo that's actually going to be sent out from Mr. Dornbush and myself as well in regards to host fee funds. And there was a question about return of investments and how that's benefited us by allocating funds for economic development. And we actually have a breakdown that actually is reminiscent of most recent projects, as well as a discussion about an up and coming project that's going to be that I mentioned a couple times now. But we can't really 100% specifically talk about it too much, but we will mention some more details in regards to that and what's coming up the pipeline. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bilich, and thank you to the Economic Development Committee for your work. So now is Operation and Administrative Committee, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Operations Administrative Committee has two resolutions before us this evening. The first is a resolution to change hours of the county clerk's office on election day, and I so move.
Thank you. We have a motion by Mr. McDonald. Do we have a second?
I second.
Ms. Fellers is the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Clerk Gumbel, can you please call the roll?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd love to call the roll on this one. We'll start with Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Gurl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Bilich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly, one more time. Thank you all, Mr. Chairman. That is 17 yes, 2 absent, and 1 AWOL.
That was a very close vote, Ms. Gumbel. I'm sure you were sweating that out. The item has been approved. Thank you. Item number 3, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next resolution awarding bids for uniform rental services, and I so move.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. So moves. Do we have a second? Mr. Booker seconds the item. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Clerk Gumbel, can you please call the roll?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Gurl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Bilich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby.
Yes.
Thank you all. Mr. Chairman, that is 18 yes and 2 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gumbel. The resolution awarding bids for uniform rental services has been approved. Mr. McDonald, does that conclude your report this evening?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that concludes the report.
Very good. Thank you for all your work and the committee's work. Item number E is the Public Works Committee. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Public Works Committee has one resolution of legislation this evening. It's 21-004. It's a resolution authorizing the execution of a local public agency agreement for federal participation for the rehabilitation of the Alpine Road Bridge over Forest Hills Road and for appropriating the local share of the funds. It's a 80-20 match between the county's motor fuel tax dollars and federal funds, and I would so move.
Thank you. Mr. Tassoni moves to approve. Do I have a second? I heard somebody second. I'm not sure who it is. Paul?
Joe.
Joe. Okay. Mr. Hoffman seconds. Is there any discussion on this item? Mr. McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know this, we haven't even passed this yet. Hypothetically speaking, if we do pass this, do we know when construction would start?
Yes, I can speak to that, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McDonald, yeah, this is a somewhat time sensitive, but it's a lengthy project, but if everything goes as well and as planned, we expect it to start ASAP and be completely finished before the snow flies this construction season. And just another note to that, kudos to the Highway Department, Mr. Molino over there. It was specific in the bid process that there will be no long-term lane closures. It will be reconstructed with traffic flowing, maybe some minor intermittent lane closures for specialty things during the day, but traffic is to be left flowing.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. Clerk Gamal, can you please call the roll?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Start with Mr. Gurl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers.
Yes.
Thank you all, Mr. Chairman. That would be 18 yes and 2 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gamal. The resolution has been approved. Mr. Tassoni, does that conclude your report this evening?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni and the Public Works Committee. Thank you for your work. The Public Safety and Judiciary Committee, Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Public Safety and Judiciary has one item that was laid over from last board meeting. It is a ordinance amending section 14-116 of the Animal Services Ordinance fee schedule. And I so move. And if Mr. Frazier could speak to it after we're seconded, I would appreciate it.
Yes. Mr. Gurl moves to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Gorel. Mr. Frazier, would you like to speak on this item?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This agenda item addresses two specific issues within our fee schedule. The first is a budgeted increase in the adoption fee for dogs. When we were working through the budget process with Mr. Chapman prior to the passage of the budget, we anticipated an increase in dog adoption fee. Takes it from $110 to $150. That still makes us the lowest cost of any adoption facility within the city. But it does help us cover a little bit more of the cost that goes into getting those animals ready for adoption. We do not anticipate it having a negative impact on the pace of adoptions. The much more important section here is addressing the way we help folks who are qualified for low-income services prove their qualification and eligibility for those services. Currently, we go off WIC standards, which requires folks prove the number of people in their household and the amount of income coming into that household. What this would change to is simply mirroring state statute, which allows us then instead to utilize their eligibility for Social Security disability and for food stamps as eligibility for our low-income services, which includes owner-requested euthanasias, but the much more popular program is our spay-neuter voucher program, which is something that low-income residents take advantage of between 300 and 400 times a year in a normal year.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion? Not hearing anyone. Does anyone have their hand up, Ms. Gamal, or? I don't see anyone. All right, Clerk Gamal, can you please call the roll?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mrs. Gorel, Yes. Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl.
Yes.
Thank you all. Mr. Chairman, that is 18 yes and 2 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gamal. The Animal Services Ordinance has been approved. Thank you
Mr.
all.
Chairman, this
Yes.
is Mr. Salgado. If I could ask a question to Mr. Fraser, since he's on the line and it's associated with the fees and stuff like that.
Please, Mr. Salgado.
Yeah, Mr. Fraser, thank you. Quick question for you. Are you guys doing any campaigns to reduce, I think you mentioned it, but I just wanted to reduce pricing for the neutering and stuff like that. And then obviously for adoption fees reductions. I know sometimes in the past you have done campaigns in the past. So just wanted to see if there's anything that you're going to do this year in comparison to that. I guess it's good to increase some fees, but also encourage, some campaigns like that for those that are unable to, obviously cover some of the cost.
Yep, we do regular adoption promotions, mostly in partnership with
Sure.
campaigns coming from outside the community. And those are opportunities definitely to get a reduced fee adoption, but fortunately, the value of what we provide with each adoption far exceeds the adoption fee itself. But we do work with folks in a number of different ways to make sure that adoption is affordable. To your other question about the cost of spay-neuter, we recognize that there are two sets of people who might want to take advantage of spay-neuter, but for whom cost might be a barrier. There are the people that you've just addressed tonight who are qualified low income, qualify for SSDI or food stamps. But then there are folks who are on a fixed income, senior citizens, students, folks who really have a hard time affording spay or neuter, but want to do that for their pet. And so what our next step now will be is to look at what are strategies that we can use to help those folks who don't qualify as the lowest income in the community, but who do have, could benefit from assistance in affording spay neuter services. That's a goal that we've got to look at for the rest of this year, and we'll come back to you with some other plan.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Girl, does that conclude your report this evening?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your work in the Public Safety and Judiciary Committee's work. Appreciate it. We'll move on to item number 10 is unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business this evening? Hearing none. Number 11, new business. Do we have any new business?
Mr. Chairman, I have an item.
Yes, Mr. Schultz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had mentioned this at the caucus, but it has been some time now since we approved the increase in the pay rate for the CNAs. And I believe that was a good move for us to make. I'm curious about and would like an update on our status. That was not the only thing that we were discussing at that time regarding the condition status of River Bluff. And so I had requested that we have an update. And I understand from Mr. Salgado that actually has already been slated for a meeting, Finance Committee next week.
And would just encourage that because there's a preparation in place right now for that conversation, if other board members would have specific questions regarding the status of River Bluff, they could direct them to Mr. Thompson, and then that could be addressed at next week's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Is there any other new business this evening?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Arena.
Thank you. I have 3 resolutions that I've asked the state's attorney's office to prepare for us regarding pending legislation. First is for House Bill 2804. This was brought to my attention by Ms. Gorel. It's a bill sponsored by a representative from out of this area to prohibit a member of the county board from sitting on the Board of Health. I've asked that resolution to be in opposition for that piece of legislation, and it to be referred to the Operations and Administrative Committee. And then Senate Bill 2278, sponsored by Senator Stottleman at the request of local mental health advocates, would remove the county board from oversight of the mental health tax. On this one, we've prepared 2 resolutions, one to support it, one to oppose it. And we'd like to have a discussion in committee and make a determination on how the board feels about it. This one is to go to finance. And then the last one, also sponsored by Senator Stottleman, Senate Bill 1721. The local proponent is the land bank, I was told. This makes changes to the trustee program. It's a more complex bill. Again, we have 2 resolutions, one in support, one opposed, and this is to be referred to operations. So I would encourage the board members to listen into those committee hearings because, we can get an education on what these are all about there, and make a determination on how the board what position we would take on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Is there any other new business? Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really quickly, Senator Stottleman filed these 2 bills, the one to remove the board member from the health board and to change the land bank. When did Senator Stottleman reach out to you, Chairman, regarding these changes?
He reached out to me in November 24th before I was sworn in and made me aware that there was some discussion surrounding the mental health board and I should get prepared for further discussions. From that moment, I had not spoken to him. He did not make me aware that he was bringing forward any amendments. I can tell you that Representative Vella did contact me in middle of January after he was sworn in. And we had a good discussion that he was being asked to submit legislation and amendments for the mental health board. I asked him if he could slow down on that until we can get a better understanding of it. He agreed to do that. And then probably a week or so ago, Mr. Arena, I was made aware that Senator Stottleman, through a third-party source, it was filing these amendments. But I have had a subsequent discussion with Mr. Stottleman, Senator Stottleman, and told him that we need more discussion and better communication going forward with any amendments that have an effect, positive or negative, against the Winnebago County. And he assured he would, and he's open for more discussions. So I think, Mr. Arena, I'm not sure what is appropriate to either invite Senator Stottleman by phone or by Zoom at those committee meetings, because both of those amendments he filed, out of his office. So that would be totally up to the committee and how they want to handle that. But I think we need a lot of discussion with Senator Stottleman surrounding these 2 amendments.
May I follow up, Chairman?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's disrespectful that Senator Stottleman does this without advice and consent of the board. He did not have these ideas upon himself. He was approached with these ideas. And these are people that we're supposedly working with the land bank trustee program, mental health board. So there's others going around us trying to cut us out of the process. And that does not look honest to me. That looks like more backdoor deals. That looks very shady to me. The fact that something is such a great idea, they have to hide it from us. So I am upset about this, and I think it's a bunch of crap that they're doing this. So I hope Senator Stottlemyre does have time to show up and explain to us why it was important to cut us out of this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Are there any other discussions surrounding? Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank
Yes.
you, Chairman.
Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. There seems to be some confusion and misunderstanding and maybe vagaries around the legislation establishing the mental health board as to who controls the money and who controls what gets proposed and what gets done. And that needs to get cleared up.
Very good point, Mr. Kelly. And I can just let the board know that my discussion with Senator Stottlemyre 2 days ago, he's more than willing to discuss these amendments. He could not really clearly articulate to me the meaning of these amendments because he had just filed them. And I know, Mr. Arena, you also spoke with him. I think you had the same perception that he couldn't articulate clearly the meaning behind the amendments. So I look forward to more discussions with Senator Stottlemyre, and hopefully we get better communication prior to amendments being filed on the floor. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you. I just want a clarification on what we just said there, Chairman. You said that he filed them but wasn't able to describe them properly?
In my conversation with him, he said it needed more discussion surrounding that, and I asked him clearly what the impact on these amendments have in Winnebago County, and he said they're still in discussion surrounding that. So, Ms. Fellers, did you have a comment?
This is Ms. Fellers.
Yes. Please, Ms. Fellers. Did we lose Ms. Fellers?
I do. I just want to, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. I just want, just as a point of clarification, that it is proper for Mr. Stottlemyre or for Senator Stottlemyre to submit things on behalf of constituents or interested, even if they do affect the county board. The county board, of course, does have its own sovereignty, but as we are not a home rule county, things that we do have to be done at the permission of Springfield, and it is proper for constituents to go directly to Senator Stottlemyre. That's not a defense, it's just a point of clarification. I do agree with Mr. McDonald that I would prefer that it does come through the board, but any changes made like this are not under the board's power and are only could be done with the permission of the state.
Thank you, Ms. Fellers. And again, I want to reiterate that Senator Stottlemyre is open for discussion. And so I believe it would be appropriate for Mr. Arena. Somebody needs to reach out to him and let him know when it's scheduled for these meetings. And I'm more than willing to do that. Now that the resolutions are opposed and in support in front of you for discussion, I think it's prudent that we do bring him in either by phone or Zoom to discuss the amendments. Mr. Arena?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I agree with what you've just said. We do need to reach out to Senator Stottlemyre and have the proponents of these pieces of legislation, justify it. And, we deliberately put forth resolutions both in support and in opposition so that there'd be a fair opportunity for both sides to make their case. And then we as a board can make an objective decision, on both the issues. So it's just the beginning of a conversation. Thank you.
Correct. Yeah, thank you. Mr. Kelly, is that your thumb? You're on mute, Mr. Kelly. Maybe he was just giving the thumbs up. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Is there any other new business?
Mr.
Mr. Webb.
Yeah.
Mr. Mr. McCarthy or Mr. Webster? I'm not sure who was first.
Yeah, okay. Just listening to this conversation, it would appear to me that a bill was submitted there that the person that submitted it, in this case, Mr. Stottleman, couldn't articulate what was in there. And I think this happens, and I'm not picking on him personally, but this happens, I think, more often than we know or we realize. I think that someone suggests to one of our legislators to introduce this legislation in Springfield, and they themselves don't even know what's in it. You know, it's like we got to read it to pass it, or we got to pass it to read it. They say, the other way around. And so I think that it is important for them to be able to articulate what is there when you ask them that specific questions. Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, Senator Stottleman said it was a work in progress, that it's open for discussion. Just the language of the amendment is very confusing to me. And I believe one of the bills, it was changing from shall to may, or may to shall. I'm trying to understand that terminology. Is that correct, Mr. Arena, in your opinion also?
Yes, that is correct. And I have asked Ms. Vaughn to review these so she can be there to give us a legal explanation on that point exactly, Chairman Shirelli, that, what does this language actually mean to us?
So that's what I really intended to say by articulating. He couldn't articulate the meaning behind that. And but at the same time, it left me in a state of confusion because I wasn't talked to prior to that, or anybody on the county board, apparently. So anyway, we'll move through that. I can assure you, we strive for better communication and better collaboration with our state legislators. So hopefully this will get a lot better. Is there any other new business? Okay, we'll move on.
Mr. Lindmark.
I'm sorry?
Mr. Lindmark.
Mr. Lindmark.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been researching, digging in, and talking to several people in regards to this police reform bill that was recently signed into law. This law is going to have devastating effects on our community. We're going to be losing officers, trying to hire new ones if we can. Crime's going to rise, which will end up hurting our economic development. I agree there's bad officers, a very small percentage, just like other professions, bad accountants, manufacturing ops, salespeople, etc. It doesn't matter. Nobody's perfect, no profession is. But this law, certain aspects of it, boy, it paints our police officers, what used to be an honorable profession, as a problem. We need to help our officers fight crime and try to improve their performance, not hinder them and put all kinds of stipulations. Yes, there's some good things in this, but there's some horrible things that is going to hurt us overall taxpayers and our community as a whole. I want to make this clear. This has nothing to do with race. It's about certain aspects of this law, making it harder for those who have taken an oath to protect and serve us. We've gotten away from calling a criminal criminal. What I would like to propose is looking into a countywide law enforcement resolution objecting to certain aspects of this law. Just similar to what a lot of other counties have done throughout the state. Again, there's some good things, but there's some absolutely horrible things in this law. And I would hope that get some support and talk about this as a county board as a whole, maybe starting with the Public Safety Committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lindmark. Any other new business?
Mr. Lindmark has his hand up.
I'm sorry?
Mr. Booker has his hand up.
Oh, Mr. Booker. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. And I was just on the phone with Mr. Girl yesterday, and we will be discussing this at length. We're putting together some personnel and such, chief, sheriff, state's attorney, chief judge and such. So I agree with Mr. Lindmark, and we will be discussing this at length at the next Public Safety Committee meeting, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Booker. Anybody else have their hand up or I can't see? Your new business? Okay. Item number 12 is announcements and communications. Clerk Gummow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The items listed below were received as correspondence.
Very good, Clerk Gummow. Thank you. Is there any other announcements? Staff members? Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Thompson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, I just wanted to update you. We are replacing the sound system in the county boardroom, and it should be, the work should be completed by April 8th, which is our next county board meeting. And I've recommended to the chairman that if the board is in agreement, that we would be ready to reinitiate in-person meetings for our county board meetings on April 8th. And I would recommend also, if that's the route that we go, that we would then initiate in-person committee meetings again after that April 8th county board meeting. But it's up to the chairman of the board and members of the board to make that decision. But the county board meeting room will be ready on April 8th.
Thank you, Pat, Mr. Thompson, for that announcement. And hopefully they get that completed. Okay, I just have couple announcements. My executive assistant, Karen Elliott, sent out today, I believe everyone should received it, from the Illinois Association of Counties. President Biden today signed the Coronavirus Fiscal Recovery Act, I believe it's called, and Winnebago County is most likely going to be receiving about $54.8 million of those funds. So I wanted everyone to be aware of that. There's going to be some criteria coming forward from the Treasury Department. And once we get that, we will be letting all of you know that. So again, that number was 54.8 million, Mr. Huffman. See, you got your ear up close to the screen.
I was writing it down.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Mutina. Yes.
So is the $54 million number is coming directly to Winnebago County, or is it going to be dispersed to all the municipalities within the county, or all government entities, I should say?
No, Winnebago County will receive their share of $54.8 million.
All right.
Okay, the city of Rockford is about 53 or 54 million also. City of Loves Park is about 2.9 million. I think Rockton, Roscoe, McChesney Park, they're all going to be receiving the smaller share according to population. But Winnebago County is the largest recipient of the money. So
thank you.
Just wanted everybody to be aware and check your emails. We did send the link from the Illinois Association of Counties to everybody this morning or this afternoon when President Biden did sign the bill. Second thing, I want to thank everybody for their work on the emergency rental assistance program. We will be rolling that out in the next couple of weeks, I believe. And once that's ready, we'll be doing a lot of social media and public announcements on that. So the people that need the money will definitely be receiving it. And thirdly, we just finished our first 3 months in office. We've done a lot of good things. I'm very proud of this county board. We've set the tone of respect and communication and collaboration, and I'm really very proud of that. So thank you. We will get more details of what's coming forward in the next quarter. A lot of good things coming forward. So just stay tuned on that. We'll keep you posted as we go on. So is there any other announcements?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McCarthy.
It's been rumored, and I'm going to pose this question to you and also Mr. Thompson, that is it true that the newly elected county board members have to show up at the administration center this Saturday night to move the clock ahead an hour for daylight savings time?
You can come anytime you like, Mr. McCarthy. In fact, I don't know if you could hear it, but it sounds like I have a raccoon crawling on the wall outside here. Is there some wild animal crying behind the window here? And I know it's not you, Mr. McCarthy, because I see you at home.
Might be a goose.
There's something back there.
Call security, call security.
All right, is there any further business in front of the county board this evening?
Might be Pepe Le Pew.
Oh,
I have
no,
a
he's out
motion.
of business.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Yes.
Mr. Grohl,
Second.
Second by Ms. Crosby. All in favor of the adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.